Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us, Art Basel Conversations, Art Basel Miami Beach Conversations, to be accurate. Very excited that you can all join us, and we're also live streaming and live streaming today. Feminism, the Global View. Please join us in welcoming all of our speakers. Thanks, you guys.
All right, am I on? Oh, yes, I'm on. Thank you, Mary. So thank you, Mary Spirito, who's my high school friend. We played soccer together. Just thought I'd let everybody know it's true. And thank you, Annalie Graf, for organizing, all of the details and for having us here today. So my name is Maura Riley, and I'm a writer, and I call myself a curatorial activist. And I've written several books on contemporary art, most recently one called Curatorial Activism, Towards an Ethics of Curating. And that's sort of been my obsession as of late, is how can we curate in an ethical fashion, which of course relates to today's discussion. But I'm also, as you can see up on the screen, I'm the founding curator of the Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum, where I was responsible for Judy Chicago's permanent installation, which you see, as well as a blockbuster show called Global Feminisms, which is why I think I was chosen to speak today. It was the biggest exhibition of feminist art that the Brooklyn Museum has organized to date. And there were 88 artists from 62 countries, so a huge exhibition. And so I just want to introduce myself, and then each of us is going to introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to discussion. So if we could have the next slide, it would be great. Thank you. The next one after that, sorry. Great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Billie Zangewa, and I am a visual artist from Johannesburg, South Africa. And I work predominantly with silk. I was born in Blantyre, Malawi, to a Malawian father and a South African mother. And I grew up in Botswana. For a brief time, I went to boarding school back in Malawi, and then I went to university at Rhodes University in Grahamstown, South Africa, where I got a fine art degree majoring in printmaking. I live in Joburg at the moment, and I'm a mother of a little boy, a 6-year-old boy. And yes, and I'm really happy to be here. Oh, and I'm a feminist.
Yes. And then we can have the next slide. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Cecilia Fajardo-Hill, and I'm a Venezuelan-British art curator and art historian. And the reason why I was invited here is because I co-curated with Andrea Junta an exhibition called Radical Women, Latin American Art, 1960-1985, that closed in Brazil very recently. As an art historian, I studied both in Venezuela and at the Courtauld Institute, and I specialized though in contemporary art, but I've been working recently more and more with Latin American art and Latino art. And I guess I am a feminist, and what I care for is a lot about the repressed aspects that, in art and culture occurs because of the institutional tendency to be biased, patriarchal, racist, etc.
Great, thank you. So now you know who's speaking here before you. And I actually wanted to start with Billie to kind of open up the conversation. We were just speaking in the green room about the concept of sort of first and second and third wave feminisms. And what I'm interested in from a global perspective is how those waves happened at different times in different areas. So I was asking Billie about sort of the history of feminist art in South Africa. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that for us. There's not much to say, but
Yes.
basically.
Well, when I was reading about Cecilia's show, I kind of realized that if I look at our, history of women artists in South Africa, not even the feminism part of it, there's only 2 of them, and they're all white women, coming from privilege. So that was really shocking for me, and I just thought, wow, that's so strange that we don't have any women of color in our art history. So, I mean, on the positive side, I can say, great, we're making history now, but I do feel inspired to get somebody to actually unearth those artists from our history, so that as people are going through university and studying, they've actually got role models to look to. So that, that for me is very pertinent. So I think I'm going to go home and like write to every curator I know and say, don't you think, do you want to do this project,
Right.
Yeah.
And you also spoke about how it was really revolutionary, I think, in your specific, geographic context to embrace the word feminism in your work and how that was a really slow revelatory realization for you.
Yes, well, I think that for me, I never really thought about it actively until I went to university and my male lecturers were telling us that as women, we shouldn't be showing too much of our gender in our work. And, I was offended by that because I felt like, is there something wrong with being a woman that we have to be so ashamed of it, that we have to hide it? So I knew that I was going to go out into the world and be as female as possible. So, I think that was really like the beginning of why it is that I sew and why I work with fabric and why I tell stories of female daily life and why I exalt in motherhood and just share the adoration that I have for my son with the world, because I will not be silent and I will not be ashamed.
Yes. Woo! Love that. We'll get back a little bit more to Billie, because I'd like her to talk about this concept of confessional feminism that's been used in relation to her work. But I'd love to turn to you, Cecilia, and have you talk a little bit about the show. I mean, it's so unbelievably extraordinary what you and Andrea were able to organize. I'd love for the audience to know more about it if they didn't see it.
Thank you. I mean, thinking of what Billie was saying, that in South Africa there is no historiography of women artists, I am sure that if someone makes the decision to actually unearth these women, they will actually come up. They will actually turn up, because there have always been women. And that was really the main reason why we did Radical Women. The main question was, where are the women? And the reality is, when you look at the histories of Latin America and also of Latina and Chicanas, when you look at how contemporary art came to be, how the experiments on video art, performance art, conceptual art came, basically there are no women that actually are protagonists in the kind of the history and the inception of these languages. So this, for us, was a major thing to be addressed, and that became the focus. And in the end, what turned out, as we kind of explored our research, I mean, in the end, we had 127 women artists spread through the 3 venues, Hammer Museum, Brooklyn Museum, and Pinacoteca in Sao Paulo. But we have like 300 more women that we didn't exhibit, because you can't make encyclopedic exhibitions today. We found that the most urgent idea behind a lot of the experimentation of between 60 and 85, which, by the way, is the time when wherever in the world the languages of contemporary art were being created, is the idea of the political body, a body that actually faces the world, reinscribes femininity, reinscribes womanhood, and actually fights against oppression. In the case of Latin America, often oppression against military regimes, civil wars. In the case of the US, against racism, against forced sterilization of, for example, Latina women. So there were always, this kind of very powerful idea of the body being at the center, whereas it is in performance or in painting as a way of enunciating and transforming a kind of a patriarchal world.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, I loved hearing that there are 300 more. I mean, I think that's phenomenal. You can do, exhibition number 2, 3, volume 1, I mean, that's wonderful. The kind of archival work that you've done there with Andrea is, to me, what's most remarkable. And it reminds me of the kind of work that was happening in the United States in the 1970s, when you had people like Linda Nochlin and Anne Sutherland Harris excavating artists, like finding them in the storage units of museums where they had been relegated, And I think that's also the work that you had to do. You had to really face a lot of, I think, obstacles, and I think it'd be interesting for people to hear that, because it was shocking to me that you still have to deal with those sorts of situations today.
I mean, when the exhibition opened at the Hammer Museum in 2017, in the fall 2017, Trump had already come into power. There has been a lot of women's participation in the streets, not only in the US, but also in Latin America is very, very strong. The kind of resurgence of the kind of a feminist protest so when it happened, it kind of, people really identified with the need of having an exhibition like this. But when we started working seriously on this project in 2010, for the first years, it was an incredible uphill battle. We were told many times that the project was irrelevant, was unnecessary, that the women that already existed were enough of them, that the project was actually patriarchal because we were doing an exhibition about women artists. And it went so far as to the institution where I began the project to fire me from the institution, which was terrible for me because I not only lost my job, but I lost my visa, and I was a just divorced mother of 2. So I felt very powerfully in my body what these women had actually felt so many years before me, that they were, ostracized, and some of them had to contend with very difficult situations as mothers, struggling as lone mothers, and also in political oppression, having to exile themselves. So somehow, this kind of embodied experience in my own body of the fact that because I wanted to defend, create visibility, and celebrate women, it was actually such a huge punishment in my own life. So that made me only more stubborn. I always say to Andrea, this is the result of a huge amount of stubbornness on our side, that in the end we succeeded in making it. And of course it happens because of the Hammer Museum. The director is a feminist. Connie Butler is a feminist. There was a wonderful woman at the Getty Foundation, Joan Weinstein. So in the end, I always say that it's the result of an army of women and some men.
Yes. Right on. Wow. It's fantastic. I think one of the things that we discussed too in the green room that struck me was how each of us defines feminism differently. And I think if you ask everyone in this room, how do you define feminism, we'd come up with a lot of different answers. And I'd love to hear from Billie about how you relate yourself to the history of feminism, or how you think about yourself in relation to that discourse.
Well, just to get right to the point, after exploring the idea of feminism and female self-expression and the body, and going through, many different stages, initially I was a little bit resistant against the patriarchal system, and I was very angry that it was so hard to be a woman, So then the work that I made earlier on, using my own body and, kind of reclaiming my narrative as well as my own body, were quite confrontational, strong images, like in a power pose. And there's a work I made called The Rebirth of Black Venus, which kind of epitomizes this. And in that work, I'm kind of saying that I'm no longer going to apologize for, not being enough. And I'm going to embrace myself as I am and love myself completely. And in the work, I'm wearing a sash that says, surrender wholeheartedly to your complexity. And the reason I refer to it as a rebirth is that with that self-acceptance came a kind of personal power. But then, as time went on, I realized, resisting can be corrosive. And also, I like that expression, that which you resist persists. So I decided that I had to have a different approach. So then I decided to approach it more from a position of love, a love of women, a celebration of women, an exalting of women. So then, the kind of images and narratives that I began to tell changed, and kind of became more focused on the intimate life of a woman, on the home front, her daily life. So with this development came what I call daily feminism. So that's actually my feminism.
I love that.
Yeah, so that's kind of my take, is that I am a daily feminist.
I love it. And it's also, there's a writer named Sean O'Toole who wrote about your work as confessional feminism. And I think it's very similar, that it's sort of just your ownership of your body, your ownership of your subject matter, and your presentation of yourself as just a Black, powerful woman. And I think, that in and of itself is just a feminist gesture. And I think that that's really beautiful, the way that you phrase it as daily feminism, I also think it's interesting that you said that, sorry, but that some of your boyfriends couldn't deal with your feminism, and that you finally settled on a guy who loves it. So, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's been rough, I tell you. But you have to struggle sometimes to get to the other side. There is a reward, You might get rejected. Because, ideally, you want to be a feminist and you also want to be a woman, so you want to be in a relationship with a guy. Because I love men, It's not like, we're going to, kill all the men and, that's not what I'm about. This is like a soft daily feminism that embraces men as well. So it's been hard, but I have finally met somebody, a big, strong, beautiful, sensitive, great man who's actually watching this right now.
Yay, hi. From South Africa, from
Yes,
Joburg.
that's right. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
'cause, yeah,
Well, hopefully your son is as well.
Yes, hopefully. No, he's in bed. He can't watch this. You'll have to
all
watch it another time.
Well, I mean, speaking of different definitions of feminism, and that's where I want to turn to Cecilia, because walking through that show was so extraordinary to see the different approaches to, like you said, the political body. And I'd love for you to sort of explain to us as a curator how you and Andrea decided like on the themes, because it really is kind of beautiful as you progress through it, and then all of a sudden you hit that room that says feminism, right? And also what you were saying a little bit about the way that you installed the show with the hammer as being like a body. So
yeah, I
fascinating.
mean, the exercise of creating themes for the exhibition was extremely hard because there is so much complexity in the work of all these artists. But there was no point of having 2022 themes because in the end they don't become themes, they become sort of justification. One of the main thing was that the idea of the exhibition, that it really needed to feel like a really huge kind of big statement. That's why I remember one of the artists came into the exhibition, mentioned that the exhibition felt like a great chorus, but at the same time like a great forum. So whenever the exhibition you saw it, when you were inside, one piece related to another piece, so there was this sense of kind of a kind of many multiple voices as opposed to simply this kind of individual voice, which is very much I guess a patriarchal thing where you create this kind of hierarchy of importance. You know, we had artists like Ligia Clark that was much more well-known and someone completely unknown from Colombia, for example. So we really wanted to eliminate that. We wanted to eliminate the idea of differences between Latinas and Chicanas and Latin American, bring them together in what actually made them. So what we found that some really strong themes, and the exhibition began with the idea of the self-portraiture is a moment where women are making a big statements about themselves, defining there is a very strong gaze looking at you. And then as you moved along, you have more poetic areas about, you know, body and the landscape, body and nature. Then you started to move to the what you call mapping the body, reconceptualizing the body and facing a lot of the issues, you know, how our body, you know, our maternity, for example, menstrual blood, or certain things are being completely kind of vilified. And then we moved into the whole idea of oppression and violence towards the body, and then the idea of words, poetry, words, and the body, and then we moved into the feminism. And the reason why we had one chapter of feminism, which surprised not only you, is, you know, the exhibition was called Radical Women, is because a lot of, even though the exhibition functions very powerfully as a huge feminist statement, many women did not see themselves as feminists, you know, as kind of defined in that way. So we wanted to create a very specific chapter within the exhibition of the women that actually call themselves that. Though the whole exhibition was very much a great fight against patriarchalism and violence, then we moved into social places, which is again a very feminist thing about, you know, you speaking from the voice of the other and so forth. And then it ended with the erotic. And so if you were to see the exhibition at the Hammer, where we staged it in a kind of more theatrical way, you literally enter through the body, pass through the kind of imaginative landscape of nature and how the body relates to the external world, and then through the tribulations of, you know, living in a world which is filled with violence and so forth. And then you came out of literally the vagina. So it was kind of an erotic act. You know, you were born out of the exhibition. You came through a woman's head and came out of the body. And at the end is a celebration of sensuality. It's a celebration of a self, the idea of pleasure, the idea of actually having pleasure to exist in this world and have a right to be the woman you want to be. And in that way, I identify so much with Billie's work, because it's almost like where we left the show, that is where Billie comes in the sense, you know, you can confirm this kind of vital idea. And what I wanted to say about this idea of feminism is that, you know, one of the reasons I feel that so many of us women and men, because feminism is also for men, is for everybody, the idea that you defend, protect, cherish, and don't oppress a woman is something that belongs to women and men, is the fact that, you know, feminism has been basically colonized and made as something kind of almost dirty. You know, if you're a feminist, you're this, and you're a bad artist, and so forth. And so it became a moment where, you know, we didn't even want to call ourselves feminists, because it was filled with all these kind of problems that, you know, kind of vilified and marginalized us. And I think I feel very powerfully, especially because the world is the way it is, that we need to really kind of re-embody this idea of feminism as this great celebration and defense of women's rights.
Yeah, we had talked about earlier how we really all need to embrace that term feminism, and that oftentimes when we see the person we're speaking with react negatively to that term, we tend to feel guilty or ashamed. And I think it might not be conscious, but there's a kind of, oh, okay, they don't get that, or they're not cool with that. And we were talking about how important it would be, instead of doing that, to turn to the person and say, wow, that makes you really uncomfortable, doesn't it? That I'm a feminist. What does that say about you, right? That we all need to learn to turn it back, because really the person that is afraid or deterred by the concept of feminism really needs help, as far as I'm concerned. So we were kind of talking a little bit about the ways in which we can begin to kind of reframe feminism. Now, I know that you've both prepared questions for each other, so I would, encourage you to do so. Billie, did you want to start?
Yes, I was wondering what it was that made you realize that this gap was there. Like, what was the moment of realization?
I mean, first of all, I'm an art historian, and the story begins by when I was studying art history, I could not find any woman like me in the books. So it just begins with the fact of representation, that the canonical ideas of beauty and representation passes for bodies that are not like mine, and also because when I studied art history before going to England to do my postgrad studies, we were studying, and there is a lot of diversity in the bodies and the color of skin. So all of us said, where are we? Bodies that are not perfect, bodies that are more round, bodies that are dark, and so forth. And it was like, this is hideous. Yeah. All these men painting all these women, and we're not there. Eventually, we found an image of Rubens. Rubens painted these nymphs, which were like really round and kind of enjoying life. And I thought, oh, wow. Then we can say, they're all white, but at least, and we used to call each other Rubian nymphs. So, because, when we say, hey, how are you, Ruben nymphs? So then it passed from the fact that, okay, so I'm not there. So who is missing? And, what was missing the women that actually could depict and represent and embody the women that we were. So then I thought, this must have happened. And then when you kind of start looking at feminism in the US and in England and so forth, which is other countries that we know more the feminism has been explored in exhibitions like yours or WAC by Connie Butler, then, I thought, well, but there must be this, in the same way there should be in Africa, I'm sure. So, and also I have made a decision already from quite a while ago, in the same way you decided, you have to be a creator activist, that I didn't want to actually continue to perpetuate a history where only men are protagonists, only this kind of white, blanched out history is the one that is being told, because it's actually a boring history, and for whoever, it's completely biased. And the idea is that...
You said boring. I love how you said it was boring.
Oh, well. The fact is that if you really, really are interested in art, why wouldn't you want to see this kind of wonderful art that has been completely hidden from view, simply because a huge kind of patriarchal structure has decided that none of that is valuable. So basically the way you recarve and reclaim and expand these histories by participating. So I started this idea of wanting to do this exhibition. Actually, at the time I was living in Miami, and there was absolutely no fly for this idea. So eventually I moved to California, and I was given a go at the beginning, and I was looking for a partner. I could hardly find anybody in Latin America that had been interested in, and then I found Andrea. There was an article about artistic feminists, so we became a team, and then we found lots, especially artists that on the way helped us. But for me, it was this idea, I am a woman, I am the daughter of an extraordinary woman, a poet, a Welsh poet that was the least feminist, most mind-boggling person. And, why are women like her not being celebrated? Why, and also I have my friends of women artists that still today are being oppressed. And so I decided, this is really what I want to do. And I remember when I was thrown out of the museum, and I spoke to Andrea, and Andrea said, well, you need to worry about your children. I said, yeah, but the first thing is the radical women. It has to happen. I was so like, I'm like, even if it's the last thing I do in my life, I actually have to do it, because for me as an artist, an art historian, a curator, to be in this world and not contribute to some sort of humanity into the system, so I better go and make coffee somewhere, because it doesn't, with the awareness I have, not do anything about it seems to be crazy. But it was an incredible decision. It took 8 years of my life, and it did not create, this sort of anyway, it makes you, puts you in a complicated position, because as you deal with marginalized subject, you're at the same time being marginalized yourself. So it's a complex operation, this kind of play between visibility, power, lack of power, and so forth. And I think these are the things that we need to navigate when we make a strong decision, which I think is necessary.
Yeah, and I think also as a result, definitely, let's clap, I mean, brilliant. I think what's amazing too about shows like this that are kind of reclaiming and excavating artists that have been neglected or completely ignored is that the ramifications of that for research, for other curators and art historians, that you are bringing these artists into light in a way now that they can't be forgotten. So it demands visibility, and I think can greatly influence, hopefully, the future, right? And I feel that way a little bit with, global feminisms. There were a lot of artists that I showed who did not identify as feminist at all, who now do, which I think is very interesting. And a lot of them didn't have New York City galleries, they had never shown in the US. And I think by giving them visibility, sometimes as curators, we can really help really help those careers. And I think what's gonna happen is, as a result of this show, it's gonna radically transform art history. And that's brilliant.
I think of your exhibition and the WAC shows. Those became the kind of two pillars, came out exactly 10 years before Radical Women, and it took a whole decade to kind of come up with something again that could become like a reference. And the catalog of the Radical Women, which was actually produced more like a book, research book, than an exhibition catalog, went, so it was completely sold out within 2 months of the exhibition, so we had to produce another one. And I know that students are actually studying the book and so forth. But one of the things I wanted to say, which I neglected to say after your question, is that by doing this project, I've really met some of the most amazing women in my life. And that has only made me more committed to the fact that, this idea of solidarity. And the fact also is that when the exhibition opened at the Hammer and we had the different venues, is that some of these women met each other. I did a kind of conversation at the Brooklyn Museum between a Chicana artist, Barbara Carrasco, and a Chilean artist, Janet Toro. And it was amazing. They're so far apart. They never knew each other. But basically, the struggles and the affinities were there. So a lot of these women have become friends. And some of them that have felt so lonely throughout their lives, suddenly, 40 years later, they find that they weren't so lonely after all. It seems to be a little consolation. But the fact of knowing that you're not alone is a huge thing. And I think for women struggling today and artists, beginning their careers and knowing that there are examples out there in art history of strong women, and not only white men, I think is very important. It makes life much easier for, it's like you wanting to create this kind of sense, the reference for the next generation. I think this is part of the story.
That's actually how I felt. I wasn't fortunate enough to see Cecilia's show because I'm in Johannesburg and it's a little bit far. But when I was reading the text leading up to this, I just was so amazed at how women in the 60s and 70s were also dealing with the domestic front. So I have sisters out there who were doing it in history, but I didn't know. I felt like I was on my own doing this, especially because when I started, because of the material that I use and the technique and the way that I approach my body, I was dismissed as decorative. So to get to a point where, I have a voice and it's a valid one, and that I have other people out there also speaking in the same way just really makes me feel connected. So thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Now, did you have a question for Billie?
So one of the things we know, and also when Radical Women came out, just a few months earlier, came out another exhibition. We wanted a revolution, black women artists in the US in the same period of time, 62, 85. So that was another huge moment of the history of the US that have been completely kind of suppressed. So we do know that, there are different ways in which, so you're a white male that is the kind of the pinnacle of, whatever. You're given a lot for granted. And then as you come down the ladder, you become a woman, and even if you're transgender, whatever, even worse. But a woman, and also a woman that is of what you call of color, though. The video I have here, which I would have loved to show a minute, she actually says that you shouldn't say a woman of color, you should say a black woman, because that's what it is. is that it's even more difficult. And reading some of the writings that have been done on you, I think I can see that there isn't a lot of maturity in actually truly apprehending the kind of the broad dimension of your work, because there is lots of things that you know break a taboo. You know, is the kind of the daily. You know, but I can't really call you narcissist because it's something like so down to earth, but at the same time you're so self-celebratory, and you do all these sort of things that then in the end, you know, they may become simple adjectives like she's so clever, she's so beautiful, she's so sexy, she's so this, and you can get that the kind of the really kind of deep undercurrent of your work, the fact you are an African artist, you're doing this in the 21st century, you're doing it, you're kind of a unique figure. So how do you find yourself in front of this sort of almost given misunderstanding of this kind of tendency to want to exoticize and want to possibly not recognize enough how difficult it is to assert yourself in the powerful way you do it? And I call this to be to be unself-conscious, which for me, when you are unself-conscious, so you are yourself, but you don't ask permission, you affirm yourself, and I feel that your work is so powerful that way. I mean, you know, so if you're standing in front of your work, it's an intimate scene of you, you nearly feel that if you need to stand in that piece with sincerity, you need to also do the same. You need to somehow remove all the trappings of this kind of big institutional approach to art and all the kind of race, whatever stuff that came. So how do you feel in front of this kind of almost lack of sophistication in the system to truly apprehend your work in the dimension that it has?
Well, first I just want to say that, you know, I like a challenge because I decided to come into this world as a black African woman, which, you know, is complex in itself. And there's the history of being exoticized and exploited. And I think that was part of the reason why I wanted to claim back my body and just give myself a voice. But obviously, you know, even in my early work, I did kind of... my narratives were kind of in relation to a man, you know, and how he perceived me and whether I was accepted or rejected. But after all, I realized that that wasn't enough for me, you know. So then I turned the gaze on myself and got to a point, and I think if you see the show, there's a work called In My Solitude, and I'm completely oblivious to the viewer because it's not about the viewer. So you can put those things on me, but I'm not accepting them because I am comfortable in my skin, I'm self-assured, I'm independent, and I'm living my life, you know? And that's the place that I've got to. And, you know, it's important for me to state the fact that it has been a journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're going to have just a little conversation amongst ourselves here about one more topic, and then we'll open it up to discussion. But I think it's an important one because it's one that I'm asked frequently, and it's also a question that Cecilia's asked, and that is there still a need for women artists exhibitions or feminist exhibitions? So my answer to that is an emphatic yes, but I'd love to hear from, obviously, the two speakers as well. Billie, did you want to approach that first?
Yes, definitely, because there's still so much work to do, and, you know, it hasn't been that long that women have had platforms. So, yes, definitely, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm actually already plotting my next women's exhibition. I have like 3 in my head. Because, I mean, not because I only want to do exhibitions about women, but I continue to find that is a priority for me. It's not the only thing that we should be doing. I mean, for me, for example, when we did Radical Women, I used to give tours to students. I said, well, it was my place here was to actually tell you that these women existed and to present it with as much dignity as possible. But now we need to kind of weave these kind of more intricate fabrics, not only in the individual shows of each one of these women, but also put them in conversation transnationally, and also you know, in relation to people of other genders and so forth, in relation to particular themes and problems that a lot of this art raises. But I do believe that as long as there are all these huge areas of art that are being kind of hidden from view, we need to continue to emphasize this. And it's not easy to do women's exhibition because there is always this kind of the pitfall, possible pitfall of kind of people already thinking, oh yeah, we know what this is about. And there is a stereotype of thinking of women. There is a stereotype about thinking about women's art. And I think that's the whole idea, that you dispel, as you do this, you continue to reinscribe what does it mean to be, be feminist, what does it mean to be a woman artist, what is relevant, and so forth. So I really feel that is necessary. And we know one of the reasons, I'm going to give you a number, women are still underrepresented in the art world, and it is not because there is a minority of women in the world. When people use, there is a minority, and when you think of Latino, they're nearly the majority in this country, but they're treated as a minority, or so forth, is that only between 10 and 30% of women are represented in collections and exhibitions. And that is a problem, because and it is not a politically correct idea. It is the idea that we need to give equal opportunity to women to actually be part of broad conversation of contemporary art today. So while the numbers are so bad, if you have a museum that is important, it has a 10% only of women in their exhibitions, it's not okay. I am not okay with that, and nobody should be okay.
And we should be contacting them and telling them that we disagree with their practices. You speak truth. When it comes to statistics, I'm like the quota queen in everything that I write. But, it is shocking that 61%, 65% actually of MFA students in the United States are female, but they're 30% of the gallery representation. So clearly there's a big problem. 12% of the works on view right now at MoMA, 12% are by women, right?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter that Connie Barla worked in that museum.
Right.
So basically they gave her a chance to make a wonderful book about modern women.
Yeah.
When Camille Morino was at the Pompidou, she did a big exhibition called Els, which was bringing out the most incredible collection of women artists. After she did the show, we had enough of that. So this has to stop. The fact that there has been a radical women does not mean that we fill the quota. That is what it really should demonstrate. And we need to we can't ignore these women from being part of the conversation and for being part of the art world. And then it happens that, the darker the skin, then it becomes even more difficult, the visibility, because the system is really very, very, very complicated. And I think not to be part of that and really kind of fight for it to change. And I think, that's really important.
So help us do it.
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah, I always call shows curatorial correctives because there's so much curatorial misconduct. So I want to open it up to the audience. I'm sure you have a million questions for these two brilliant women. So yeah, sure. So I think there's a microphone going around. Oh my God, it's Nicole Hebron. Hi. Nicole started what's one of the most important, I think, I would call it an curatorial activist project and called Gallery Tally. And I encourage all of you to Google it and to look at the amazing, amazing kind of posters that have been made really specifically about sexism in commercial galleries. But maybe, Nicole, you could say a couple words about that?
Oh my gosh,
you are a total rock star. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I am in total awe and admiration of all of you and all of your work. I'm really appreciative and grateful to be here today. What an incredible day of talks. I wanted to just piggyback on the conversation about quotas, as I do. I've been for 5 years tracking the representation of male, female, and otherwise identified artists in galleries around the world as a crowdsourced collective project where I invite artists to help visualize the statistics of artists represented in the top kind of commercial galleries. And we've tallied about 600 galleries so far. And over, the aggregated number is 30 to 33% of artists represented are female identifying. But I'm also now really thinking a lot about money and the way we value or don't value women's labor and women's art. And I really like to bring this up, especially at Art Basel, which is so much about sales. And we recently, so again, my question for all of you with a comment addendum to that is, what can we do to encourage people to pay more for art by women? Mm-hmm. And I'd like to add that we recently saw kind of records broken for sales. A David Hockney work sold for $90.3 million. And not long before that, Jenny Seville's self-portrait sold for $12.4 million. That's a pretty big wage gap. If you think about like the top selling works by male and female identified artists, for dead artists, it's Da Vinci's piece at 450 million and O'Keeffe at 44 million. So generally in the auction, women tend to bring in about 10% of the top prices for men. So I would
Quite a discount.
Yeah. So what do we do to get women artists paid what they're worth and what they deserve?
Well, I'm not an expert in the market, but the issue is that, for example, when you do exhibitions such as Global Feminism and Radical Women, and many of the women did not even have a market, didn't have a gallery, didn't have anything, and some of them are beginning to be exhibited and they've been taken, been represented by galleries, but they're not really doing a great job, because I feel that one of the things that needs to happen, that there need to be a lot more specialized gallery, not in selling easy work, but in selling difficult works. What you call difficult art. Yeah. And I think, and I don't mean it difficult in a negative way, difficult in a wonderful way, especially conceptual art. And I feel that there aren't enough galleries out there that are actually daring to push forward, art that is not sufficiently commercial. And then I think that is really what, for me, has to change in a very powerful way. That, once you represent this kind of very experimental aspect of women, which I think has been always a very powerful, contribution of women, then they're not going to have the same. And also, I feel that art historians and critics and curators need to stop comparing women to men. Even now that we have an exhibition of Kramer, the widow of Jackson Pollock, is at the, I don't know if he's at the Barbican or the Hayward Gallery in London. When you look at the press release, she was the wife of Jackson Pollock. She was whatever of Jackson Pollock. Yep. And that automatically puts her in a position of subservience to Jackson Pollock. So they have to stop, and this is something that we need to do as writers. We need to stop doing this. So when a woman is a woman artist, then she should be celebrated for what it is. So the market is a reflection of a whole system that is all confabulating in order to make women kind of a second degree, whatever, second category human or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, the art market is so complicated, and it's something I think about constantly, and I'm appalled, actually, by those statistics, which are totally spot on, what Nicole has relayed. For me, I think we have to hold a lot of people accountable. I think we have to hold the galleries accountable. They're the ones who are putting the prices on the works. We have to hold the collectors accountable. They shouldn't just be buying work that is by people that look like them, which is white men. We need to hold acquisition committees accountable at museums. But we also need to keep speaking up because it's not okay. It's not okay that Lee Krasner was referred to in the Observer in London as, the wife of Jackson Pollock has a show and her name's not even in the title. Like, that's not okay. Like, what we should be doing, and what I'm always encouraging students and friends of mine to do, is to constantly speak up, like call the Observer, find out who the author is and say, dude, that's not okay. And it was a man who did it. I can't remember his name, but I'll find out. But I think that a lot of it is about accountability, and also the onus also is on us to walk up to that gallerist or to walk up to that collector and say, do you collect women? Are you paying full price? Do you care about collecting women? Just really, I think, opening up the conversation and again, holding everyone accountable is, I think, just a good way to start. We have a long way to go, but we've got to start somewhere. And I think starting is a conversation, and maybe a very uncomfortable one, Other question? Oh, sorry.
I completely agree with what Maura said about holding people accountable. Because I would love to make more money. I'm a single parent, and I also have to provide. So let's make them accountable and
forget that the wage gap for women of color is again what it is for white women.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What Nicole's saying, in case you can't hear, is that the wage gap for black women is even worse than clearly for white women, because that's just the given of the racist art system.
And I'm also glad that I'm not married to an artist, because and I won't be
You'd be
somebody's
comparing
wife.
or
Yes.
yeah. I mean, I also want to put the onus out there too. I forgot the people that could equally help, which are the other artists at the gallery. So the white male artists who are at galleries should be demanding that their gallerists increase the price of the women artists that are in their gallery stable. They should be standing up for the women. And if they're not, shame on them. Shame on them.
May I say something?
There's, yeah.
I come from Italy.
Yeah.
Okay, I am an Italian. Oh, thank you. I am an Italian curator, and I struggled very much to do only women show. The last I did was Body to Body in the National Gallery in Roma.
Yes. Oh, wow. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And it was it took me 5 years before the director changed, and a young woman finally started to direct the gallery, and she was interested in the topic, so we did it. A very small one, because of course we had no money at all, and no one wants to put money on that. But I have to say that on the same time, I am a single mother too, and I have to make a living out of it. Plus I have twins, not one, two. Yeah. Okay, I did, everything big. And so you know what I did as an activist? I decided to push women's sale. I'm not interested if people tell me that I am colluded with the market. Yes, I am, because I want women to be bought by collectors. I met a man, an intelligent one, I have to say, that he's a gallerist based in London, Richard Saltoun, and we decided to go in fairs only with women artists and to make a fight, a struggle, a battle on that, exhibiting and presenting and proposing to collectors women. And I had that uncomfortable conversation with collectors that come in the stand. I remember in MiArt in Milano 4 years ago, a big Italian collector popped up in the stand and said, "What are you showing?" I said, "A body art show." "Huh, you are showing women?" "Yes." And he walked away without even looked at that. So, there's lot of to do, and each one of us should do, a little bit of activism in every sense. I'm trying to do another women's show. It's so hard, but I keep trying. Thank you.
Talk to us and we'll see if we can help.
Thank you.
Just to pick up on that very quickly, first of all, thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing. Thank you. But just to pick up too, that I think another really interesting way that we can intervene, all of us, is literally to go to something like Gallery Tally and download like the posters into like postcard size, which I think you can do. And when you come to like Art Basel, walk up to that gallerist and say, "Just thought I should tell you that you have 13% women." And it'll be the gallerinas, the gallerinas will be like, "What?" But make sure it gets to the director, or stand there and demand to talk to the director, right? It doesn't hurt, and just give him or her. And horrifyingly, a lot of female curators are just as bad, female gallerists. So I think it's important like that we take those kind of actions, or go to Pussy Galore is a new arts collective, and they've been using a lot of Guerrilla Girls statistics and updating them. That's another place that you can go and download, and it really shows the galleries who are doing the worst for women. And what we need to say then is to our friends, don't buy from those galleries because they're not supporting women. Yes. Other questions? I'm sure there are others. Wow, look at that. So many.
Here we go.
Hi.
Real quick question, one sentence. How many female directors of museums are out there?
Not many. It is, I want to say the last American Association of Museum Directors did a study in 2017, and in the top 10 museums in the country, in the US, like, the Met and MoMA, et cetera, they've never had female directors. But it's something like 30%. It's pretty analogous to galleries. But the important part to mention in that 30% is that they're directors of the smallest museums. They're the directors of like university museums and not directors of like LACMA, right? So you need to look at the operating budget of the museum too. So the women directors are running the small museums and the guys are running the big ones, is the answer to that question.
Hello, my name is Jessica Ewood. I'm from Connecticut, and I'm an artist. Thank you all so much for doing this talk. I'm really, really enjoying it, and it was probably my favorite conversation so far. But I have a question for all three of you. Maybe all three of you could touch on it because you're all so brilliant. I'm an artist, and when I got into my first gallery, which is owned by a female, I wasn't selling anything under my name, Jessica Ewood. So she advised that I drop my prices in half. And when I did, I actually sold everything. Then because I sold everything, another gallery had asked for my works. And I dropped the name Jessica and just went under my last name, Ewood. And I sold the works, but at the original price that I wanted. Wow. So my question to you is, why do you think that is? Do you think people do it deliberately, or is it a subconscious kind of thing that?
Such a good question.
Yeah, is it I don't even know if people are doing it deliberately, but is it just a subconscious thing that this is better without having a woman's, first and last name?
Just quickly, I'll let you both answer, but I mean, I think if you just went by Zangewa, it would, because it's your body, right?
Well, I say put back your first name and demand the same price. That's all I can say. Because, I've had a lot of criticism because people go, oh, but all she does is sew and she uses silk, and why does her work sell for so much money? That's because I'm worth it.
Oh, yes. Woo! I love it. I love it. Well, I'm just thinking about also, weirdly, the 19th century, how many women authors changed their name to male pseudonyms. So George Sand, George Eliot. But I want to turn to Cecilia, because one of the most famous artists from Brazil is Gego, who's a woman artist. So I wondered if that was a conscious decision on her part. It's sort of interesting. I never thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, Gego was originally German, and then she went to Venezuela. I really don't know in her case if that's the case, but her work wasn't really geared towards gender. I think the problem becomes more, for example, Lee Kramer. Lee Krasner. In her case, she actually dropped. She
did.
She put
She
the
was
L
Leonore.
dot, and a lot of artists were actually. Promoted to do that, to eliminate whatever it kind of implied a kind of agenda at the beginning, and then if that wasn't part of the discussion, maybe they would actually sell it. There is an artist in the radical women called Marie-Aurèle Saz that she lives in France. She's been in France for a very long time, and I don't know how the person understood Maure Saz, but when she appeared, these galleries had actually seen her work, and he loved it, so he said, "We'd come for a meeting." And when she appeared, she said, "Oh, but you're a woman. I'm not interested in talking to you."
Yeah.
And this is the story of a lot of people. And also, these are the ones that we know. But how many times simply, because having studied this, what makes a man a great experimental avant-garde, etc., 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 is what makes a woman a kitsch artist, a bad artist, a copycat, and an original,
derivative,
and banal, has no great ideas. Especially, the whole big pursuit of the avant-garde from the early 20th century was to bring art and life close together. Women have been the most brilliant, people to do that. But because it's women, they say, oh, it's all about domesticity and lack of ideas. Yeah. But when it's men, oh my God, he's so revolutionary. He's using sewing in his work. So I think it's...
collage.
Yes, it's like, so basically, we need to really be careful of the fact that we actually judge under a completely unfair scale to women, and there is many proofs that women, when they're being tested for worthiness, they are subjected to a much harder scrutiny. So I think it's really a moment in the world for women to stand up for who they are, and for all of us to stand for women. I think erasing one's identity is completely the wrong thing to do, because literally it's chopping yourself in half.
Yeah. We need solidarity. Absolutely. I think we have time for one more question, unless I'm going to be yelled at.
Thank you. It's not really a question, but it's kind of a comment, I think, that would work with what you are speaking about. I'm a public school teacher. I taught middle school art. And these children know nothing about history. They know nothing about art history. My male peers do not teach about women artists. I mean, even the history teachers will not teach about women artists or architects or anything. So I think the public needs to get down to the school districts and get them to open up the children's eyes. I was one of the few teachers to constantly show women artists, black artists, heaven forbid, I couldn't do anything with the gay, lesbian art. That would not be allowed. But we need more art teachers to teach the young kids about art and women in art. We really do need to start there.
Definitely.
I mean, you're doing what you're doing, but the parents and the teachers need to start at kindergarten and do this stuff.
Absolutely.
My son tells all his friends that my mom's on Google, so he's doing work for me at school. So little 6-year-old boys are hearing from another 6-year-old boy about how his mom is this amazing artist who got a special mention and is on Google, you know?
Oh,
So
that's brilliant.
Yeah, I guess that really speaks out to younger generation. If you're on the internet, I remember my son, the day he discovered that if you put my name, a bunch of stuff comes up. He's like, whoa, you're famous. I'm like, well, I wouldn't really call it that, but...
So cute.
There was one more question
One
from
more
a lady
question.
here. And then,
We can keep going.
Thank you. My name is Carley Aguilera. I'm a private art dealer from Venezuela, Miami, and New York recently.
Mucho gusto.
Congratulations to this fascinated panel. I was shocked in New York to see how Carmen Carrera from Cuba, geometrical master art, was recently discovered, or at least shown in an important museum as a Whitney. Do you think it was for racism? Because she was a woman?
yeah, I can maybe tell you a little bit about her
Yes.
because I actually bought
I'll
some
be
of her
happy.
first works when I was the curator of a collection here in Miami.
Just
by
explain
Cisneros.
who she is a little bit too. Explain who she is a little too.
Yeah, so
'cause we're-
Carmen Carrera is an artist of Cuban origin, a Cuban artist, and moved to New York and started to work really in the 1950s and was friend of all the really super famous abstract artists in New York at the time, but none of them ever spoke out or defended or promoted the work of Carmen Carrera. So eventually it was Tony Bechara, who is on the board of the Museo del Barrio, who actually really pushed her to really kind of become more public and also to get a gallery. I remember we bought some pieces and then we exhibited some of the works and so forth. Eventually, recently, there was an exhibition at the Whitney Museum, but it's taken her 50 more years and all her peer white male, who knew how brilliant she was, because she was she's very old, but she's originally, but for me, what is interesting, when the Whitney Museum decided to do a retrospective of her work, they gave her a very small space at the top of the museum, because I know her work, it was so edited that a lot of it, you could not be really appreciated. I was, where is this? Where is this? Where is this? So in the end, there's still a tokenism. At the end of the day, then, you know, you make this exhibition, and this exhibition is too small for an artist of her stature. So definitely racism, and secondly, because she's a woman.
Sexism, yeah. I want to end on a positive note, or at least, because that's so depressing. I mean, the whole Carmen Carrera, it's really upsetting. And especially also that, like many women artists today, she's only getting her due just as she's about to leave the planet. You know, I mean, it's really sad how many brilliant artists are only getting sort of retrospectives in their 70s, women artists like Carolee Schneemann and all these women that have deserved it since decades. But I did want to say, just as a final note, that I hope that each and every one of you will sort of think about what you personally can do, right, to try to rectify the situation, whether it's like we talked about, talking to a gallerist who is not representing women or artists of color, you know, just to try to find a way that each individually we can try to make a difference. And I think that's how we can begin. Thank you for coming.